I'm an overworked alpha office drone, bitter, gloomy, and unapologetically chauvinistic. My beta spouse is the complete opposite of me. Beautiful, gentle, kind, and devoted to taking care of the household. Everyone who's ever seen the two of us together says the same thing. If your spouse weren't a beta, you'd never be good enough for him. So I constantly used his status as a beta to manipulate him. You'd better not be thinking about getting a divorce. Just look at yourself. Other than me, what alpha out there would ever want you? My wife, half a head taller than me, obediently agreed. But later, I was the one who asked for a divorce, and my once gentle spouse ignored my resistance. He wrapped a chain around my ankle, then bit down on my still developing gland and marked me. Tenderly cupping my dazed face in his hands, he whispered, "Hubby, just look at yourself now. Do you really think there's another dog out there who would listen to you better than I do?" "Hubby, what are you thinking about?" My wife's voice pulled me back to reality. I instinctively looked up at him. Rong Yu was about half a head taller than me. To be honest, he didn't look anything like a stay-at-home beta spouse. The only thing that really gave away his role was the floral apron he was wearing. His hands were unconsciously clasped together, betraying a hint of nervousness. Above them was a face that perfectly matched his gentle voice. His slightly overgrown bangs were pinned to one side with an orange-shaped hair clip, revealing soft, delicate features and warm eyes. My coworker had been right. He was a beta who didn't look like a beta at all. But that wasn't the important part. The important part was what happened during the department dinner tonight when my coworkers saw Rong Yu. "Hey, Brother Dylan, is this your spouse? I never would have guessed. You've been hiding such a beautiful wife all this time. What a shame he's a beta." I couldn't hear much of what was said afterward. The words "never would have guessed" pierced straight through my alcohol-numbed brain. Even the weight of the oversized black-rimmed glasses on my nose suddenly felt unusually obvious. Too annoyed to respond, I took off my glasses and rubbed my forehead, giving only a perfunctory smile. By then, Rong Yu had apparently grown impatient waiting. He walked over and called softly, "Hubby." I answered vaguely. I had absolutely no intention of introducing him to anyone. Rong Yu didn't seem to mind, or perhaps he did. Turning toward my stunned coworker, he rested a hand on my shoulder and leaned lightly against me. "Hubby, who is this?" he asked gently. I was about to answer when I noticed my coworker staring fixedly at me from the corner of my eye. Just like most people who had seen the two of us together, he was probably thinking that I wasn't worthy of someone like Rong Yu. The thought instantly soured my mood. Any desire to make a proper introduction vanished. "A coworker," I said casually. Then I turned and headed for the exit without even bothering to say goodbye. "Let's go home." Rong Yu, however, was far more polite. He quickly grabbed my hand. "Wait, hubby. Shouldn't you say goodbye to your coworker first?" Instinctively, I glanced in my coworker's direction. But Rong Yu had somehow positioned himself perfectly in front of me, completely blocking my view. I couldn't see a thing. Tilting his head, he smiled as if he'd noticed nothing at all. "Hubby?" I was speechless. Wasn't he the one who wanted me to say goodbye? Then why was he standing in the way? The alcohol slowed my thoughts. Forget it. It wasn't important anyway. "It's fine," I said. "We're not close." Only then did Rong Yu seem satisfied with the answer. He pressed his lips together in a shy smile and wrapped his arm around mine again. A cool, pleasant warmth spread from his skin. The scent of pomegranate body wash drifted through the air. Touch and fragrance worked together, making my head grow light and my senses blur. In the end, all I could hear was my wife's usual gentle, obedient voice. His tone was cheerful as he said, "Okay, hubby." Rong Yu and I met through a blind date. The reason I agreed to it was simple. My mother, a beta who had been bedridden for years, worried that she might not live long enough to see me get married. So she started arranging blind dates for me. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to tell her that no one would ever choose someone like me. Sure, I was an alpha, but both of my parents were betas, which left me with pitifully weak pheromones. And unlike the cedarwood scent that omegas adored, my pheromones smelled faintly of sweet oranges, far too sugary and barely noticeable. After graduation, I had been lucky enough to land a job at a major company, but I was nothing more than an ordinary office worker, grinding away from 9 to 5. I didn't own a car, and I was still burdened with a mortgage. And that wasn't even the worst part. I had a dull personality. spent most of my time shut indoors, and looked perpetually gloomy. Years of being stuck in an office had left my skin pale. I rotated through the same few plaid shirts every week. My slightly overgrown hair hid my eyes from view, while my thick black-rimmed glasses served as a barrier between me and everyone else. An alpha like me? How could any Omega possibly be interested? Reality proved exactly that. One after another, Omegas rejected me. Some did it politely and shyly. Others couldn't even be bothered to hide their disdain. Each rejection stabbed at my already fragile nerves. See, I knew it. I'm just that terrible. My mother, however, remained surprisingly optimistic. Lying in her hospital bed, she reached out and gently patted my head. Through my thick glasses, I could see the warmth and affection in her eyes. Take your time. There's no need to rush. Our Dylan is such a handsome boy. You'll definitely find someone you like, and who likes you back. The corner of my mouth twitched. I had no idea where she got that confidence from. Then again, parents always seem to see their children through the strongest filter imaginable. Whatever. It wasn't worth arguing about. So I continued the endless cycle of blind dates. Until I met Wrong You. In theory, according to the matching system used by ABO dating agencies, a beta and an alpha should never have been paired together. Not to mention that the partner I'd listed as my ideal type was a gentle Omega. But by sheer coincidence, Wrong You and I ended up having our blind dates at the same cafe. I was there with my Omega match. He was there with his beta match. Neither date went particularly well. My Omega date had barely left when Wrong You's beta date got up and left as well. For me, it was just another failed blind date. I'd lost count of how many there had been. I was used to it. Wrong You, however, was clearly a beginner. After his date left, he remained sitting alone at the table with his face buried in his hands. It looked like he was crying. I hesitated for a moment. Then, in the end, I walked over and held out a packet of tissues. Here. Wrong You looked up. In the few short seconds before raising his head, he had already regained control of himself. Aside from the faint redness around his eyes, there was no sign he had been crying at all. He accepted the tissues. His cool fingertips brushed mine for only an instant before pulling away. Sorry. Wrong You had a habit of looking directly into people's eyes when he spoke. Meeting my gaze, he asked softly, "Am I really that awful?" He wouldn't even stay long enough to hear me finish speaking before he left. The words felt painfully familiar. I blinked. For a moment, I was stunned. Then I remembered something my mother had once told me. It's okay. Take your time. Don't rush. Someone as good-looking as you will definitely find a person you like, and who likes you back. Honestly, it wasn't just empty comfort. Wrong You was incredibly handsome. The kind of handsome that made people want to keep looking. He tilted his head slightly upward. At first, his eyes stayed fixed on mine, but after a moment he seemed to realize that staring so directly might be impolite. His gaze drifted lower, settling somewhere around my lips. Then he took a sip of water, calming himself. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth as he listened to my awkward attempt at encouragement. Slowly, leisurely, he said, "Then I'll take that as a blessing." His smile widened ever so slightly. "And hopefully your words come true." After that day, Wrong You and I began running into each other more and more often. Sometimes it was at blind date venues. Sometimes when I actually left the house to buy groceries or stock up on snacks. Other times it was during my daily commute. As time passed, we gradually grew closer. Then one day, Wrong You casually asked, "Brother Dylan, why did you start going on blind dates in the first place?" After listening to my explanation, he looked at me and asked, "Then, what do you think of me?" I froze and looked up at him. Behind my thick lenses, I saw Wrong You staring directly at me, his gaze focused, gentle, and unwavering. As if possessed, I said yes. From that moment on, I gained a gentle, caring beta spouse. Not long afterward, my mother's health began to improve as well. I finally had enough energy to devote myself both to my work and to the little home Wrong You and I shared. Everything seemed to be getting better, slowly, steadily, until those ill-timed voices returned. The curse I had never truly escaped wrapped itself around me once more. "Hey, have you seen Dylan's spouse? He's ridiculously good-looking. Never would have guessed Dylan was living that well. Do you think Dylan has some kind of leverage over him? Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. I'm telling you, if Wrong You wasn't a beta, there's no way he'd ever look twice at Dylan." Spouse. It was the first time I had ever called him that after our marriage. Rongyu's eyes immediately lit up with surprise and delight. What is it, hubby? I gave him the perfect smile I'd practiced countless times in front of the mirror. Meeting his gaze, I copied his usual gentle tone and asked, Would you quit your job and stay at home? I want to see you the moment I come home every day. Would that be okay? If I kept him at home, no one else would see him. And if no one saw him, then no one would keep discussing whether the two of us were a good match. The malice churning inside me surged upward, swallowing me whole. The image of the person before me twisted and distorted in my mind. For a moment it felt as though he would explode in anger and shout, Who do you think you are? What makes someone like you think you can ask for something like that? But then a familiar bright voice broke through my thoughts. Okay, hubby. Rongyu's tone rose with excitement. His face was glowing with happiness. He grabbed my hand, bent down, and nuzzled lightly against my neck. His voice was soft as he whispered, I've wanted to do that for a long time already. Outside, I had to maintain the dignity of being the head of the household. I couldn't stoop to arguing with a bunch of fools who coveted my spouse's beauty. But at home, things were different. The faint buzz from the alcohol had completely faded during the ride back. By the time we got home, and after finishing the hangover soup Rongyu personally fed me, my mind was clearer than ever. As I briefly reflected on everything that had happened since Rongyu and I first met, my thoughts eventually returned to the present. I found myself thinking about Tongxi, the new coworker whose eyes had practically been glued to Rongyu during the department dinner. Ever since Rongyu had agreed to become a full-time house husband, that old irritation had begun resurfacing. Why? I'd already told him to stay at home and wait for me to come back. So why did he insist on going out? Meanwhile, after asking, Hubby, what are you thinking about? Rongyu had apparently realized that I wasn't answering. The faint smile that usually lingered on his lips stiffened slightly. Hubby? He called again. Then, as if remembering something, his voice softened even further, so gentle it seemed as though it might melt into water. Are you thinking about that coworker from today? I cut him off. Why did you suddenly come pick me up today? Rongyu paused for a moment. Then he explained softly, You were much later than usual tonight. I was worried about you. Fair enough. As a spouse worried about their husband, that was a perfectly reasonable explanation. I nodded, reluctantly accepting it. Still, the restaurant where our department dinner had been held was quite a distance from the company. How had Rongyu known I was there? Maybe I'd mentioned it casually during one of our conversations. Rubbing my forehead, I decided not to dwell on it. Instead, I got straight to the point. Don't come pick me up without telling me next time. Rongyu blinked. Why? My irritation immediately flared. Why do you need so many reasons? The moment I said it, I remembered the way Tongxi had stared. Then I looked up at Rongyu. Even dressed in nothing more than simple loungewear, his beauty was impossible to hide. If he weren't a beta... The thought stopped there, but the unease in my chest only grew heavier. The moment that thought crossed my mind, my mood grew even darker. The frustration I'd been suppressing finally spilled out. You're a beta, but you're married now, to an alpha. I'm not asking you to stay at home all day like some omegas do, taking care of their husband and children. But the least you could do is go out less often, right? My voice grew colder. I work so hard for this family. Is something this simple really too much for you to do? The belittling undertone in my words wasn't hidden in the slightest. Rongyu's expression eased slightly. Then, as though he had suddenly remembered something, he asked in a quieter voice than usual, If I don't do that, will you divorce me, hubby? Divorce? The word immediately caught my attention. My expression darkened. You'd better not be thinking about divorce. I stared at him warningly. Just look at yourself. Other than me, what alpha out there would even want you? The contempt in my words was so blatant that it was practically being spoken directly to his face. Rongyu blinked, then murmured softly, That's good. I hadn't heard him clearly. What? But Rongyu didn't answer. Instead, the tension that had been holding his body rigid for so long suddenly disappeared. He walked toward me with unhurried steps. Then he sat down right beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. Wrapping an arm around my waist, he leaned against me and buried his face against my chest. The thin white shirt between us did nothing to block the warmth of his breath. His voice came through the fabric, slightly muffled. Soft, clingy, almost impossible to hear clearly. Yet he seemed to be agreeing with everything I'd said. Hmm. His arms tightened around me. Then, in a voice full of quiet affection, he whispered, I know. Other than you, hubby. Which other alpha could possibly like me this much? Over the next few days, I went back to my usual routine of squeezing onto the subway and heading to work. At first, I thought Tongshi would be like everyone else I'd met before, obsessing over whether my beta spouse and I were a good match, making what he thought were clever jokes about it. To my surprise, he didn't say a single word. Not only that, the moment he saw me, he'd react like a mouse spotting a cat and disappear in the blink of an eye. Normally, I wouldn't have cared. In fact, I preferred it that way. The problem was that Tongshi was the intern I was personally mentoring. A lot of things couldn't be properly explained through messages alone. His constant avoidance was seriously disrupting the workflow. In the end, I had no choice but to catch him after work and talk things out. As usual, I adjusted the black-rimmed glasses on my nose and offered him a polite smile. Tongshi, can we talk for a minute? He glanced at me. Then his face instantly turned bright red. Oh, okay, Dylan. I blinked. Why was he blushing? And when did he stop calling me Brother Dylan? Whatever. Not important. We found a cafe near the company and sat down. Originally, I planned to gently ask whether something had happened recently, problems at home, personal issues, anything that might explain his behavior. But somehow, the conversation drifted completely off course. Tongshi kept his head lowered. Brother Dylan, why do you wear glasses? Because I'm nearsighted. Oh, right. Nearsightedness is good. Very good. I closed my eyes. At that moment, I seriously began questioning whether arranging this talk had been a terrible mistake. Then, after hesitating for a long while, Tongshi finally spoke again. Brother Dylan, do you like betas? There it was, beta. The moment I heard the word, I felt an odd sense of certainty, so that was it. Ever since seeing Wrong You that night, this had been what was bothering him. The only difference was that he was much more polite than most people. Seeing that I wasn't answering, Tongshi hurriedly tried to explain himself. I just mean, your spouse is a beta, and alphas have rut periods and all that. No, that's not what I meant. I mean, I'm a beta too. Before he could finish, my phone rang, interrupting him completely. The caller ID displayed a familiar name. Wrong You. He had no idea what was happening on my end. Just like always, his voice was gentle and calm. Hubby, what time are you coming home today? Before I could calculate how long it would take me to get back, Wrong You continued talking on his own. Why aren't you saying anything? There was a smile in his voice. Don't tell me you're going out to dinner with your co-workers again. Then he let out a soft sigh and asked teasingly, Or, do you already have plans with someone else tonight? By the time I got home, it was already late. Wrong You brought the reheated dishes back to the dining table and sat down right beside me, close enough that the familiar scent of pomegranate became even more noticeable. He picked up some food and placed it in my bowl. Then, as if casually complaining, he said, Hubby's been coming home really late these past few days. It's just overtime. That was all I said. As for why I had been working late, I deliberately left it out. Almost instinctively, I blurred Tongshi's existence from the story. I didn't want Wrong You to know there was someone like him. Not even his name. Not even the vague idea that such a person existed. After answering, my thoughts drifted back to what had happened earlier at the cafe, to Tongshi's reaction when Wrong You had called. The moment my phone rang, he'd immediately straightened up and focused intently on stirring the coffee in front of him, acting as though he wasn't interested in our conversation at all, as though he couldn't hear a thing. But somehow, I felt that was just an act. Even though they had never met face-to-face and were separated by a phone call, I could vividly imagine Wrong You's expression on the other end. His brows would be slightly furrowed. His eyes would be soft and glistening with concern. If you looked closely enough, you could probably even see the fine hairs along his cheeks. Beautiful things were always bound to attract attention. Even now. I still didn't understand. What exactly did Wrong You like about me? Was it really just because I'd handed him a pack of tissues on the day we met? And if that was the case, didn't that mean someone else could win him over the exact same way? Just like the person sitting across from me now. At some point, Tongshi had finished his coffee. Resting his chin on one hand, he sat there staring at me. Or perhaps, he wasn't looking at me at all. Perhaps he was looking at the phone beside my ear, using it as a bridge, trying to hear the voice on the other end, trying to catch even the faintest glimpse of that distant, elusive figure. Only when he noticed me looking back did he panic and quickly avert his eyes. The tips of his ears turned pink, pretending he hadn't been doing anything at all. That brief glance was enough to make the irritation inside me flare up again. Lowering my eyes, I did something rare. I lied. No. Then I pressed my lips together and added, "I'll be home soon." The moment the words left my mouth, I hung up before Rong Yu could respond. And honestly, I wasn't wrong. Whether it was spending the past few days cleaning up Tongshi's mistakes and staying at the office until only the two of us were left, or sitting here now forced to have this conversation because of his terrible efficiency. To me, it was all overtime. My thoughts returned to the present. I looked at Rong Yu. He seemed like he still wanted to say something. Before he could, I impatiently cut him off. "Why are you being so sensitive? I already told you it was just overtime. You always overthink the smallest things. You're not even an Omega? Is it really that serious?" The familiar barrage of criticism came spilling out. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Then Rong Yu reached over and wrapped his arm around mine. His head was lowered slightly. A tear hung from his eyelashes, trembling as though it might fall at any moment. Looking a little wronged, he whispered, "Hubby, I was only trying to ask if you were tired." "Oh." I fell silent. After a moment, I lowered my eyes and replied, "I'm fine." The conversation died instantly. Silence settled over the room. And in that silence, I suddenly realized something. Just like I'd said myself, Rong Yu was a beta. He didn't understand the invisible currents of pheromones between alphas and omegas. He wasn't sensitive to the wolves and predators lurking around him, coveting what wasn't theirs. And he certainly knew nothing about the fragile self-esteem his alpha husband tried so desperately to protect. Only I did. The one who was suspicious and oversensitive was me. The one constantly worrying about gaining and losing was me. The one who was both insecure and arrogant was still me. Sometimes I found myself wondering, was a marriage between an alpha and a beta really the right choice? I stared blankly at the table full of delicious food. The dishes were fragrant, beautifully prepared, and undoubtedly made with care. Yet I couldn't bring myself to pick up my chopsticks. Lost in thought, I drifted farther and farther away. And because of that, I never saw the expression behind me. The warmth and gentleness that usually filled Rong Yu's eyes had vanished. In their place was something dark, something cold. His gaze locked onto me, unmoving, possessive, far more intense than the way Tongshi had ever looked at me. There wasn't the slightest trace left of the pitiful, tearful spouse from moments ago. After a simple dinner, I spent some time on the couch dealing with work documents. Eventually, I blinked my tired, stinging eyes, took off my heavy, black-rimmed glasses, and headed to the bathroom. Without them, everything was blurry. The world looked as though it were hidden behind a layer of frosted glass. Nothing was truly clear. Perhaps because my mind was elsewhere while I showered, my hand slipped, and I accidentally squeezed out twice as much body wash as usual. By the time I stepped out of the bathroom, the scent of pomegranate lingered even more heavily in the air. My thoughts felt just as muddled. Uncomfortable. I've probably been overworking myself lately, I thought. After all, it wasn't just the overtime at the office. Even after getting home, I'd often stay up late revising project proposals. A night's sleep should fix it. Thinking that, I found my way to the bed from memory. I lay down and closed my eyes. "Hubby?" In my haze, I thought I heard Rong Yu's voice beside my ear. He seemed to be saying something. Warm breath brushed against the sensitive tip of my ear, leaving a faint flush behind. Struggling against the endless waves of dizziness, I forced my eyes open. What? What should I do, hubby? What should he do about what? Before I could figure it out, Rong Yu brushed his nose lightly against the underdeveloped gland at the back of my neck. A shiver ran through me. My gland was probably turning red again. It was enough for Rong Yu to immediately realize what was happening. His fingers gently rubbed the area as concern colored his voice. "Hubby, did your sensitivity period come early again?" Yet for some reason, his actions didn't quite match his worried words. His movements were slow and deliberate. Unhurried, the pressure of his fingers was perfectly measured. Every touch sent involuntary tremors through me. At some point, my fingers were gently but firmly separated. Then our hands intertwined. 10 fingers locked together. As my consciousness began slipping away, I could hear fragments of soft murmurs, words of affection. But my mind was too muddled to hold on to them. Nothing stayed. Nothing became clear. Hubby, why did you lie today? You didn't come home late because of overtime. Oh, I know. He must have been the one keeping you there, right? Some people are really good at pretending. You were only fooled by the image he put on. I don't like the way he looks at you. Can you not like him either? Hubby, didn't you say you liked obedient people the most? If that's the case, why can't you keep looking at only me? Maybe if I marked you. No, you'd definitely get angry with me. It's okay. It's okay. As long as hubby stays with me, that's enough. I'll take care of everyone else who wants you. The voice continued in a low murmur, like someone speaking in a dream, like a confession, like madness. But I couldn't hear it clearly anymore. The only thing I could vaguely feel was the cool touch of fingers brushing gently against my cheek. The murmuring finally stopped. Then a soft sigh sounded beside me. Hubby is so good. The faint scent of orange pheromones was coaxed into the air. It mingled with the ever-present fragrance of pomegranate, thread by thread, entwining together, impossible to separate. This wasn't the first time my sensitivity period had arrived early. The lower an alpha's pheromone level, the more frequent and unpredictable their sensitivity periods tended to be. They also lasted for shorter periods of time and were more easily influenced by emotions. Of course, there was also the possibility that an Enigma had deliberately triggered an early sensitivity period. But obviously, that wasn't the case for me. I was the former. The last time it happened was because I'd unexpectedly run into an Omega I had almost married. And this time, I quickly reviewed everything that had happened recently. Every person I'd met, every event I'd experienced. In the end, I had to admit the truth with bitter frustration. It was all because of a beta. A young, handsome beta who might have designs on my beta spouse, despite the fact that the two of them had never even met face to face. By the time my mind had mostly cleared, Rongyu had just finished helping me through another wave of discomfort. He was sitting at the edge of the bed, carefully cleaning the traces left on his hands. I glanced at the clock. 12:30 a.m. Nearly 2 hours had passed. Quietly, I watched his peaceful profile. After a long moment, I suddenly asked, "Sweetheart, how about I help you too?" Rongyu stiffened. Lowering his head, he looked at me. His expression remained flawless, not revealing the slightest crack. "Why so suddenly, hubby?" I smiled. "Well, every time it's only you helping me." "Can I help you sometimes too?" Rongyu immediately threw himself into my arms. Burying his face against my chest, he stayed silent for a long time before finally speaking in a muffled voice. "Hubby, you're so good to me. But let's forget it. You're already so busy every day, and you're in your sensitivity period right now. It's what I should do." Exactly as expected, just like countless times before. Whenever I tried to take things a step further, Rongyu would refuse, always with a different excuse. I wanted to ask him why. I wanted to ask whether he thought I was an idiot. What kind of married couple spent this long together without ever becoming truly intimate? With only one person endlessly helping the other? The questions reached my lips, yet I couldn't bring myself to say them. I knew I shouldn't be thinking this way, but I couldn't stop. A beta couldn't mark an alpha. The sense of security I longed for remained frustratingly out of reach. Our physical intimacy never seemed to move forward. On the surface, Rongyu's gentle affection surrounded me like an airtight spider's web, softly wrapping around me until I sank deeper and deeper into it. Yet at other times, it felt like a castle floating in the air. Beautiful. Fragile, as though it might collapse at any moment. The sudden doubt was like a spark falling onto a field of dry grass. All it needed was a single gust of wind, and it would spread into an unstoppable wildfire. Using a business trip as an excuse, I avoided Rongyu for more than half a month. During that time, my attitude toward him could only be described as cold. Whenever he sent messages, I'd either leave them on read or reply with only a few brief words. At first, Rongyu called several times a day. "When are you coming back from your trip? What did you do today? What did you eat? Did you miss me?" Questions about all sorts of trivial little things. But later on, even the calls became less frequent, then fewer messages. And now, even though my business trip was over, and I was already back at the office, able to go home tonight, I glanced at my phone. There was only a single message, sent at 3 in the morning. "When are you coming back?" Even the usual hubby at the beginning was gone. Perhaps I'd been staring at the screen for too long. Tongshi, who had accompanied me on the trip, noticed something was off and walked over. "Brother Dylan, what's wrong?" I put my phone away. Nothing. But Tongshi's eyes immediately lit up. "Did you have a fight with your spouse?" I looked at him expressionlessly. For the past 2 weeks, I'd been dragging him all over another province to work on the project. We'd gotten considerably more familiar with each other. At this point, he wasn't afraid of my cold stare at all. In fact, one look at my face was enough for him to know he'd guessed correctly. He grinned and tried to comfort me. "Come on. Couples fight at the head of the bed and make up by the foot of it." I continued staring at him with dead eyes. I genuinely didn't understand. Didn't Tongshi like Rong Yu? Then how could he act so unconcerned now? Could that conversation we'd had at the cafe really have been that effective? Effective enough to last until now? A series of questions flashed through my mind. Seeing that I remained silent, Tongshi rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Wait, don't tell me you've already tried making up and it didn't work?" He muttered to himself. "That shouldn't be possible." I'd finally had enough. "Are you very free right now? If you have nothing better to do, go summarize the project from this business trip and turn it into a PowerPoint presentation for the report meeting." "No!" Tongshi let out a dramatic wail. Grabbing my wrist, he shook it back and forth. "Brother Dylan, I was wrong." Then, as if a light bulb had suddenly gone off in his head, he straightened up immediately. "Brother Dylan," his eyes sparkled with excitement, "I know how to help you win your spouse's heart back." After work, I was dragged off by Tongshi. First, he insisted on taking me to get a haircut and a new hairstyle. Then he somehow convinced me to get a pair of contact lenses. The entire time, I darkly suspected that he was trying to make me embarrass myself in front of Rong Yu, so he could swoop in afterward and steal him away. And while I was thinking that, I accidentally said it out loud. That was when I learned something surprising. Tongshi didn't like Rong Yu at all. Faced with my accusation, he immediately cried out in protest. "I'm innocent. I'm just a face enthusiast, okay?" Then he pointed dramatically at the person in the mirror across from us. "Brother Dylan, you're way more my type than your spouse is." I followed his finger and looked up. Without the thick black-rimmed glasses, without the overly long bangs, the features I'd spent years hiding were finally revealed. The person staring back at me from the mirror had bright eyes. The unfamiliar sensation of the contact lenses made them slightly red around the edges. The curve of my eyes naturally tilted upward, giving them a faint smile even when my face was expressionless. For a moment, I froze. Was that really me? The reflection looked strangely unfamiliar, as if I were looking at someone else entirely. Someone younger, someone more confident, someone who had never spent years hiding behind oversized glasses and lowered eyes. Tongshi crossed his arms and nodded with satisfaction. "See? I told you. Brother Dylan, you've been wasting that face for years." I stared silently at my reflection. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't sure what to say. Holding a bouquet of roses in my arms, I walked home beneath the moonlight. For once, my steps felt unusually light. Tongshi's words echoed in my ears again. "Brother Dylan, trust me. Just stand in front of your spouse, hand over the roses, and no matter how big the problem is, it'll be solved." Maybe I should listen to Rong Yu's explanation, just like I'd listened to Tongshi's, instead of retreating into my shell whenever something went wrong. Maybe he had reasons he couldn't talk about. Maybe there was some issue he was too embarrassed to tell me. Maybe all those things I'd worried about before were nothing more than my own overactive imagination. But reality couldn't have been more different. Downstairs in our apartment complex, under the pale moonlight, I saw Rong Yu, my beta spouse, standing very close to someone else. The two of them were talking intimately about something, close enough that the other person could undoubtedly smell the familiar pomegranate scent lingering on Rong Yu. I stood there, watching. I didn't know for how long. Then, at a certain angle, the moonlight illuminated the other person's face, and I finally recognized him. It was the beta blind date partner who had left first the day Rong Yu and I met. Voices echoed in my ears, perhaps memories, perhaps my own imagination. Dylan's spouse must have something on him. Otherwise, none of this makes sense. That's not necessarily true. Alphas can't mark betas. Once a beta washes up and goes outside, who would know whether they're single or not? If you ask me, betas should be with other betas. What's the point of being with an alpha? As if betas would actually like alphas. Come on, who wants a crazy dog that starts biting people whenever its sensitivity period arrives? AOs are the perfect match, one pot, one lid. If it weren't for basic sympathy, what beta would willingly let an alpha bite their gland? At last, it felt like I'd found something to argue against. No. No. I never bit him. I never did. The wind seemed to pick up. My legs felt strangely numb. I couldn't even remember how I made it upstairs. When I reached the door, I realized I'd forgotten my keys. Just as I lifted my hand to knock, the door opened from the inside. Rong-yu stood there. He looked tired. Very tired. Hubby, you... He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes fell on the bouquet in my arms. For the briefest moment, something dark flashed through his gaze. Then the familiar smile returned. Are those flowers for me? I didn't answer. Instead, I walked past him into the apartment. I carefully set the large bouquet of roses down. Then I turned around and looked at him. Rong-yu. My voice was calm. Far calmer than I expected. Let's get divorced. When Dylan told Rong-yu he was going on a business trip, Rong-yu didn't realize anything was wrong. Over the phone, he clung to the conversation as usual. Hubby, when are you coming back from your trip? And when Dylan replied coldly, I don't know. Depends on the situation. Rong-yu still didn't notice anything unusual. Instead, he curled up contentedly in the nest he'd built from Dylan's worn clothes. Burying his nose in the fabric, he breathed in the deeply soaked scent of oranges lingering on them. My husband is so cute, he thought to himself. Then he let out a quiet sigh. He wondered when Dylan would finally come home. Looking on the bright side, at least he didn't have to take Dylan's clothes out of the closet every day to build a nest, only to carefully put everything back before Dylan returned. But then a week passed, and Dylan still hadn't come home. The trip had already lasted far longer than any of his previous business trips. Meanwhile, Dylan's attitude on the phone became increasingly perfunctory, increasingly distant. Finally, Rong-yu began to panic. He picked up his phone and called an assistant. Find out who went on the business trip with Dylan. The answer came quickly. Tong-shi. Beta. Along with several secretly taken photos. In the pictures, the two of them appeared startlingly close. Close enough to make Rong-yu's eyes sting. For a long moment, he stared at the photos. Then he calmly came to a conclusion. It had to be a misunderstanding. The photos were taken from misleading angles. They had to be. After all, his Dylan would never leave him. That very night, Rong-yu entered a sensitivity period for the first time in a long while. Compared to ordinary alphas, an Enigma's sensitivity period typically occurred only once every 1 or 2 years. It was far more regular and much less susceptible to outside influences. But because of that, if intense emotions disrupted their pheromone balance and triggered an early onset, the desires they usually kept tightly suppressed would erupt with even greater force. For 7 long days, Rong-yu endured it alone. And in that state, every time he thought about Dylan, an endless longing would rise inside him. Yet he couldn't even call him. Feeling wronged, Rong-yu thought to himself that he couldn't possibly disguise his voice right now. What if Dylan heard it and disliked him? After all, he'd investigated everything from the very beginning. He knew Dylan liked gentle, soft-spoken omegas. He wasn't an omega. The least he could do was remain gentle. But it was getting harder and harder. In the end, all he could do was send the same message over and over again. Hubby, when are you coming back? Sometimes Dylan replied, I don't know. Sometimes he didn't reply at all. Rong-yu couldn't stop thinking, what was Dylan doing right now? Was he with that damn Tong-shi again? Did he miss him? Or did he not want him anymore? Only then did Rong-yu realize something. Dylan seemed to be angry, so he began replaying everything. Every moment before Dylan left on the business trip. Every conversation. Every expression. Searching desperately for the mistake he'd made. At the same time, he instructed his assistant to continue monitoring Dylan and Tong-shi's movements every day, just like he had done back when Dylan was still working at the company. Again and again, he thought about it. Again and again, he obsessed over it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, his assistant informed him that Dylan had returned from the trip and gone back to the office. By then, the entire house, and nearly every piece of Dylan's clothing in it, had been saturated with the scent of pomegranate. Calculating the timing carefully, Rong-yu gave himself an inhibitor injection. Then he waited, and waited, only to hear another report from his assistant. Dylan and Tong-shi went shopping together after work. For a moment, Rongyu froze. Shopping. Together. Shopping. Together. If this wasn't a date, then what was? He and Dylan barely went out together at all. In the past, he'd been able to comfort himself by thinking that Dylan was simply possessive because he loved him. But now, the thought no longer worked, and for the first time in a very long while, Rongyu's smile disappeared completely. The violent surge of emotions triggered another pheromone flare-up. Over the past week, Rongyu had already used up every Enigma suppressant he'd hidden around the house, and Dylan's return was getting closer and closer. Left with no other choice, he contacted his assistant and asked them to bring more suppressants. The exchange took place secretly beneath the apartment building, like some kind of underground operation. His assistant looked at him expressionlessly. "President Rong, you currently smell like a giant pomegranate that's gained consciousness. Give me the suppressant." No employee enjoyed spending their days helping their boss with shady little missions like this. If not for the salary, the assistant handed over the injection. "President Rong, Secretary Xing says that if you don't return to the company soon, he's going to let it collapse out of spite." Without missing a beat, Rongyu jabbed the suppressant into his arm. "Say one more word and I'll dock your pay." The assistant immediately shut up. For about 3 seconds, then he opened his mouth again. "President Rong." Rongyu smiled. "You'd better have a reason." Looking at that smile, the assistant couldn't help feeling a headache coming on. Where was the gentle, affectionate Rongyu who called Dylan hubby in the sweetest voice imaginable? This version was impossible to watch. In the end, he forced himself to continue. "President Rong, I just wanted to remind you that keeping this secret forever isn't really a solution. What if Mr. Dylan decides to divorce you?" Rongyu's smile didn't change. "If you keep talking, your paycheck is definitely getting cut." The assistant wisely decided not to continue the conversation. In any case, after all the chaos, by the time Rongyu had finally managed to stabilize his pheromones and compose himself, it was already too late. Footsteps sounded from outside the door. Heavy, unusually heavy. Did Dylan drink tonight? Worry immediately surfaced in Rongyu's mind. Without hesitation, he hurried to the entrance and opened the door. The first thing he saw was Dylan's face. Those delicate features. Those eyes. The eyes he'd secretly admired countless times while Dylan slept, brushing aside his bangs just to look at him a little longer. "Hubby, you." He started to speak. Then he saw the bouquet. The vivid red roses in Dylan's arms. And suddenly, he remembered what his assistant had reported earlier. Dylan and Tongshi had gone shopping together after work. Rongyu didn't want to believe the possibility that immediately sprang to mind, so he forced a smile. Avoiding the subject entirely, he asked, "Are those flowers for me?" Instead of answering, Dylan walked past him, set the bouquet down, turned around and looked directly at him. Then, in a calm voice, he said, "Rongyu, let's get divorced." "What?" Rongyu sounded as though he hadn't heard me clearly. With a soft click, he closed the door behind him and walked over. Stopping in front of me, he lowered his eyelashes, concealing whatever emotions lay beneath. Then he asked softly, "Hubby, what did you just say?" "I said, let's D." Before I could finish, my words were cut off. Rongyu interrupted me and asked again, "Hubby, what did you say? I didn't hear you." The rich scent of pomegranate seemed to thicken in the air once more. Sweet. Intoxicating. The faint orange scent of my pheromones was drawn out involuntarily. My thoughts began growing hazy again. For the first time, I realized something was wrong. I pushed against his shoulder, trying to stop him from moving closer. "You!" The effort accomplished very little. Rongyu brushed against my ear and lowered his gaze. Looking genuinely troubled, he said, "Hubby, I've been thinking about it for a long time. Why were you angry with me? Why do you suddenly want a divorce?" He paused, then seemed to reach a conclusion. "After thinking it over and over, I realized it was probably because I didn't let you help me that day." His fingers tilted my chin upward. His voice was impossibly gentle. "Hubby, you should have told me sooner." The moon hung high in the night sky. Silver light spilled across the earth like a translucent veil. Rongyu watched my every reaction carefully, then asked again, "Hubby, why do you want a divorce?" I clenched my teeth and refused to answer. Instead of pressing for a response, he seemed to sink deeper into his own thoughts. "Is it because of that beta?" His tone remained calm. "But he can't even mark you. He's so useless. Why would you divorce me because of someone like him? I covered my eyes, trying to avoid his intense gaze. Finally, I snapped. You used to be a beta too. You couldn't mark me either. Who said that? Rongyu gently stroked my cheek. Then, as if kindly reminding me of something obvious, he said, Hubby, you've been covered in my pomegranate scent for a very long time already. That was body wash before. Rongyu only smiled and said nothing. A terrible realization suddenly struck me. This lunatic. But what I hadn't expected was that he could be even more unreasonable than I'd imagined. Over the following days, every attempt to argue with him proved completely ineffective. No matter how many times I protested, or how many times I demanded answers, he remained stubbornly unmoved. Even when I was exhausted from arguing, he simply stayed by my side, refusing to let the conversation end, as though he were determined to hear me say that I would stay. Only after everything finally settled down did he cup my face in both hands. His eyes were filled with unmistakable affection. Then he leaned closer and murmured, Hubby, look at you now. His smile softened. Other than me, do you really think you'll find anyone else who listens to you this well? I ended up missing 5 days of work, 3 days of complete chaos, 2 days spent recovering. During those 5 days, Rongyu coaxed, tricked, and cornered me into telling him everything. The things I should have said. The things I shouldn't have said. All the dark, petty, ugly thoughts I'd been too ashamed to admit even to myself. As for Rongyu, after listening to my entire confession, he became so excited that he practically spilled everything on his own. Every misunderstanding was cleared up in one go. At long last, the tension between us finally eased. Resting his chin on one hand, Rongyu smiled smugly. So that's how popular I am in hubby's eyes. I was speechless. The filter I'd once had for my gentle beta spouse had been ridiculously thick. I wanted to turn away and ignore him. Unfortunately, I was also afraid he'd take advantage of my exposed back and launch another sneak attack. So I lay perfectly straight on the bed, entering a state of complete enlightenment. Rongyu climbed into bed beside me. Wrapping an arm around my waist, he leaned against me as usual. Then he said softly, But in my eyes, hubby is very eye-catching too. I closed my eyes. You're the only one who thinks that. Rongyu immediately objected. Nope. Then he began listing my virtues one by one, producing evidence as though he were arguing a legal case. A lot of people think so. When I used to pick you up from work, plenty of people couldn't stop looking at you. You just never noticed. They were only using someone they didn't know to put you down, as if elevating another person's status would somehow bring them closer to yours. In reality, it just made their intentions look ridiculous. After all, you're talented, dependable, calm. The more he praised me, the hotter my face became. Unable to take it anymore, I covered his mouth. Okay, that's enough. Rongyu laughed against my palm. After that, we simply held each other in silence for a while. Then he seemed to remember something. The fluffy top of his head rubbed against my chest before he looked up at me. His dark eyes were fixed entirely on mine. Hubby? His voice was quiet. But now I'm the crazy dog who loses control during sensitivity periods. He paused, then added, So you're not allowed to abandon me. My eyes suddenly felt warm. Blinking rapidly, I lowered my gaze and answered softly, Okay, I won't. Rongyu's extra chapter, I told Dylan that I fell in love with him at first sight in that cafe. He thought I was just sweet-talking him. But I wasn't. The truth was, we'd met once before that day. Because Enigmas mature more slowly than ordinary alphas, I didn't experience my first sensitivity period until my freshman year of college. To be honest, it was awful. The surge of pheromones was impossible to control. And it came without warning. With no other choice, I locked myself inside an empty study room, then completely passed out. Somewhere in my haze, I vaguely smelled oranges, a faint, sweet orange scent. When I woke up again, I was lying in the campus infirmary. Someone was sitting nearby. Oh, you're awake. It was Dylan. He probably didn't remember me at all. After seeing that I'd regained consciousness, he simply explained a few precautions about sensitivity periods. Then he left. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I was grateful, of course, but nothing more. Until one day, that faint orange scent appeared again. I followed it instinctively, step by step, until I found its source. Separated by a pane of glass, I saw Dylan sitting inside a cafe. His attention was focused entirely on the laptop in front of him. His expression was serious, concentrated. He looked tired. The dark circles under his eyes were obvious even from a distance. Yet he kept working, kept staring at the screen, as though he had forgotten everything else around him. I should have left. Instead, I found myself standing there, watching him, for far longer than I intended. The orange scent drifted faintly through the air, warm, comforting. For some reason, it made me remember that study room. And the moment I woke up to see him sitting beside my bed, only then did I realize something. The scent I'd remembered all this time belonged to him, to Dylan. And for the first time, I couldn't take my eyes off him. He took off his black-rimmed glasses and rubbed his eyes. Looking exhausted, he leaned back in his chair, lips slightly parted. The sunlight fell across his face, illuminating his features. He looked unbelievably beautiful. I can barely remember what I felt in that moment anymore. I only remember that a breeze drifted by. The wind chimes hanging outside the cafe door rang softly, and my heart felt exactly the same way. After that came our carefully orchestrated second meeting. Inside the cafe, my beta assistant sat across from me, maintaining a polite, professional smile. "President Wrong," he asked quietly, "what would you like me to do next?" I lifted my eyes and looked past him. Dylan was sitting with his back to me. From this angle, I couldn't see his face, nor could I see the occasional glances directed toward him by others nearby. I said calmly, "When the Omega sitting across from him leaves, you leave too." My assistant didn't understand, but he obeyed anyway. If, and I mean if, we had remained complete strangers. If fate hadn't given me another opportunity, then I would simply create one myself. I covered my face with my hands, pretending to be heartbroken. And then, just as I'd imagined countless times, a clear, familiar voice sounded beside me. "Hello. Here, this is for you." It was Dylan. Since that was the case, I looked up. My fingers brushed lightly against his skin as I accepted the tissues. Then I stared directly into his eyes. "Sorry." At that moment, I finally had the perfect excuse to say the words I'd always wanted to hear. A smile threatened to escape. Then I'll take that as a blessing. Because, hubby, you were the one who approached me first.